I was made aware of this information in an unconventional manner. It came to pass at the commencement of our customary annual men's fishing excursion, which I undertake with Scott, Stan and Roger. On this occasion, we proceeded to the lake for a 3-day fishing trip. The fishing trip was a day-long excursion, while our wives were engaged in a weekend of leisure. We have been acquainted for a considerable number of years, and Roger and Mary are our most intimate friends. Stan Fortunato is Roger's nephew and is several years his junior, yet we have gradually incorporated him into our social circle. He subsequently became one of my most trusted employees, when Laura and I got married shortly after graduating from high school. Despite my young age, I was already goal-oriented and hardworking. I started a small pool service business shortly after graduating from high school. Within 2 years, it had grown to serve over 100 homes with 4 employees. The business continued to thrive. 20 years later, I served over 1. He currently oversees a team of 30 dedicated employees, including the invaluable Stan, who has proven to be a wonderful asset to the company despite having no college education or work experience. Stan's enthusiasm, hard work ethic, and excellent team relationships made him an exceptional leader for our Orlando location. In recognition of his outstanding contributions, I promoted him, offering him a significant salary increase and the opportunity to become. As the company expanded, our professional relationship developed into a true friendship. We enjoyed working together over the years and I expanded the company's business from Tampa to Orlando. This enabled us to become the leading pool service company in Central Florida, as the vast majority of homes have swimming pools that require constant care and maintenance. Our services are in great demand, and this has resulted in a sharp increase in revenues and profits, which has strengthened the company's position in the market. As the company grew, the importance of financial management became apparent. I relied on Howard, a trusted and experienced family member who was a retired tax accountant and had a wealth of financial knowledge. He advised me to use all my home equity to expand my business when mortgage rates were extremely low. My confidence in Howard is a testament to his experience and dedication. He and his attorney, my wife, played a significant role in our success by providing invaluable advice and guidance that proved instrumental in helping the company thrive. Howard's wife, Beth, a corporate lawyer, suggested putting the company into a trust to protect the assets from liabilities and possible future lawsuits. I followed her advice and became my sole confidant. The pursuit of a dream home is a common aspect of married life. My wife Laura and our new home is the subject of great admiration from our friends. It is situated in a neighborhood that is comparable in scale to Chica's, with a swimming pool of considerable dimensions, a spacious patio with a Hawaiian bar and barbecue area that would be the envy of any enthusiast of the sport, not to mention a plethora of luxurious amenities that Laura has insisted upon. She is adept at exerting her influence and I am powerless to refuse her persuasive charm. It is evident that the value of these houses in our exclusive neighborhood is appreciating at a rate that is faster than a shooting star, so naturally I acquiesced to Laura's every whim, cognizant that when the time came to sell, we would be the beneficiaries. Love has the capacity to compel us to act in ways we would not otherwise consider, but it is ultimately for the greater good, is it not? The day has arrived. Laura and her companions have arrived at our opulent residence for a weekend of solitude. Upon their arrival, I was instructed in no uncertain terms to refrain from interfering with their activities. Their objective was to enjoy themselves without the interference of their husbands. I was eager to escape the constraints of social interaction and engage in leisure activities with them. I hastened to the location, eager to commence the fishing excursion. After weeks of strenuous work in managing my expanding enterprise, the prospect of catching more fish and sharing a refreshing beverage with my companions was a blissful experience to leave the ladies to their own devices, indulging in their wine and secrets. I could not help but consider myself fortunate to have Laura and her cohort of strategists in my life. They may occasionally drive us husbands to distraction, but we are aware that they are the catalyst that enhances the mundanity of our daily lives. As I drove to Roger's house, I could not help but smile, aware that the weekend adventure was just beginning. We had meticulously planned our excursion to the lake, intending to depart at 6. We departed at 6 p.m. and anticipated reaching our destination by 9 p.m. The third item on the agenda was to commence the fishing trip at 6 p.m. The excursion promised to be both exciting and instructive, offering the opportunity to engage in angling and to foster camaraderie. As I prepared to embark, however, I was suddenly struck by the realization that I had neglected to procure the requisite bait. For me, angling is not merely a pastime, it is a passion. I take pride in crafting my lures and tackle with the conviction that the optimal tackle can serve as the linchpin of a successful catch. This lure, which I have been developing over the past week, has a particular significance for me. It is a piece of work that I am proud of, a bespoke item crafted with the intention of attracting the largest fish and providing me with pleasure on the water. I am aware of the importance of having the perfect bait, and I could not imagine going on a trip without it. Consequently, I informed my fishing companions that I needed to collect my bait before we set off on our excursion. They reacted with amusement. At 5 p.m., the other anglers were understanding of my dedication to the sport. In the evening, I entered my vehicle and drove for 7 minutes to my residence. I parked behind the cars belonging to the women in the household and proceeded on foot to the side door. I entered the residence quietly and proceeded to the workshop, attempting to avoid disturbing the other occupants or receiving a reprimand for arriving home early. I proceeded to the bench and observed. I could hear women talking. I recall laughing, realizing that they were already inebriated, as evidenced by their giggling and apparent enjoyment. They were situated in the shade adjacent to the Hawaiian hut on the side of my residence. The workbench was positioned directly beneath the window, within audible range of their conversation. I am not inclined to eavesdrop, nor do I concern myself with the content of other people's conversations. However, when I heard my wife discussing me in bed, I became intrigued. I am uncertain as to why, but I decided to record this portion of the conversation and subsequently tease her when I returned. To this end, I activated the voice recording application on my iPhone. The following minutes of my fishing experience were significantly disrupted by the unexpected occurrence of a nearby conversation. I found myself unexpectedly immersed in a discussion of a highly personal nature, which was characterized by a notable degree of frankness and open discourse. The content of the discussion pertained to matters of a private and intimate nature, which were shared with a notable degree of candor. The conversation became increasingly salacious. Laura, laughing mischievously, did not hesitate to discuss her relationship with her husband with me. I overheard her telling the other woman how great I was with my tongue and how I had never disappointed her after all these years. I was struck by the irony of the situation. She proceeded to extol the virtues of her husband, yet the veracity of their statements was evident. Despite the passage of time and the maturation of their relationship, the vicissitudes of married life remained. It is not uncommon for even the most stable of marriages to experience periods of turbulence. However, a sudden inquiry from one of the other women took the conversation in an unexpected direction. The question, which could be described as the million-dollar question, prompted Laura to divulge the reason behind her recent activities with Stan. I listened attentively, eager to discern Laura's reaction to this surprising revelation. The girls were engaged in a process of inquiry, attempting to comprehend the nuances of Laura's recent conduct. Based on her candor, I anticipated that the discussion was poised to evolve in an intriguing manner as Laura responded. Tension and intrigue hung in the air. My heart skipped a beat, and I was incredulous at what I had just heard. Had I heard correctly? Had Laura just said that she had something with Stan, our Stan? Panic and disbelief washed over me like a tidal wave, and I leaned even closer, desperately trying to catch every word. I was overwhelmed by the implications of this information. Stan, whom I had trusted and considered a friend, was involved in something with my wife. I felt a sense of disbelief and disorientation, as if the ground beneath me were crumbling. I struggled to maintain control of my emotions as I listened to their words, which seemed to pierce my heart with a sharp pain. The heartfelt giggles and laughter that once brought joy now sounded like a cruel symphony of betrayal. My hands were shaking as I clutched the phone. My heart was pounding wildly in my chest, and tears were threatening to flow from my eyes as I continued to listen to this heartbreaking conversation. I felt I was rendered a helpless bystander in my own life, overwhelmed by the shock and pain. I was consumed by the desire to rewind time and erase these words from my life. The truth hit me like a brick, shattering the trust one had placed in Laura and Stan. I felt lost. I was utterly betrayed and completely broken. The pain was unbearable, and I was both lost and devastated. After listening to the conversation, I realized that my life would never be the same. The innocence and happiness that filled our home will now be replaced by heartache and despair. I have a good sex life with Bob. In this regard, he has always been a suitable partner for me. I love him and would never deliberately initiate a relationship with Stan. It simply happened that way. Come on, Laura. You engaged in infidelity with Bob. It is implausible that you are genuinely happy in your marriage. You lack an understanding of the depth of my affection for Bob. He is not merely my romantic partner, he is my home, my peace, my heart, and my safe place. I am satisfied with my relationship. I love my partner very much. The incident with Stan was a mistake. However, you indicated that he is a wonderful lover. Therefore, we assumed that you had sex with him. We do not understand this situation. Please provide a detailed account. It would be prudent to remain here, as the men will likely resort to violence against Stan, and my husband will undoubtedly terminate our relationship if he discovers my involvement with Stan. I would never intentionally harm him, as he is a kind and gentle individual. However, he is unlikely to comprehend the gravity of my actions. I request your solemn assurance that this conversation will remain exclusively between us. I did not directly hear the responses, but I assumed they were all in agreement. The group reached a consensus. It is imperative that you refrain from repeating any of this information. Following Susan's departure from Stan's life last month, he was in a state of disarray and profound disbelief. He had intended to propose marriage to her on the day I encountered him at the restaurant. We proceeded to engage in a conversation, during which he divulged the entire narrative to me. It was evident from his demeanor that he was profoundly distraught. I felt immense compassion for him. I remained with him until he had regained his composure. His emotional state was such that I felt an obligation to provide him with care and support. I was of the opinion that he was old enough to be my son. Laura, you had a sexual desire to care for him, not a maternal one. As it transpired, you were correct, but at the time, sexual desire was not a factor for me. He proceeded to. I accompanied him to the vehicle and expressed my gratitude for my friendship and willingness to engage in emotional expression. I simply smiled and kissed him on the cheek. It was at this moment that the spark began. Before I could move away from him, he pulled me towards him and kissed me in a manner that I recall as being particularly sexual. It had been many years since Bob had kissed me in such a manner, and that kiss had caused my knees to tremble. Hearing her words, I experienced a profound sense of distress and heaviness in my chest. I trembled, uncertain whether it was a manifestation of anger or a manifestation of fear regarding what she would say next. After we broke the kiss, he, without uttering a word, took my hand and led me to his truck, which was parked a few rows down under a shady tree. I am uncertain as to why I allowed him to do this. I was rendered spellbound. Consequently, we entered he then led me to the back of his car, where we engaged in a prolonged kissing session reminiscent of the courtship rituals observed among high school sweethearts. He then proceeded to articulate his long-standing attraction to me and his fantasies of a romantic involvement with me. I must admit that I was taken aback by his effusive compliments but nevertheless proceeded to act in a manner that I now recognize as being incongruous with my usual conduct. At that moment, I was unable to consider the implications of my actions for Bob or our family. I proceeded to unfasten his belt and pull down his pants. I am unable to articulate the precise reason behind my sudden urge to taste it. He expressed immense gratitude and stated that he was in need of it, given the circumstances he had endured. Upon hearing this, I experienced a profound sense of emotional distress, a feeling that permeated every aspect of my being. I became visibly shaken and trembled involuntarily, as a result of this overwhelming sensation. A sense of loss washed over me. Roger's wife, Mary, spoke next, stating, "I had no idea you were capable of this." I concurred. I had never considered engaging in such an act, yet it felt natural. Scott's wife, Emily, added, "I believe many women fantasize about this, but it rarely occurs." I expressed admiration for her candor. Laura's response was particularly intriguing. She was aware that she had transgressed and experienced profound remorse for crossing a boundary that she had no business crossing. When I came to my senses and realized what I had done, I was suddenly overwhelmed by a sense of guilt. I was cognizant of the fact that my actions were wrong and that Bob would never comprehend my rationale, so I was compelled to ensure that it did not occur again. I informed Stan that it was a one-time occurrence. I informed him that we would never engage in such behavior again. I then explained that Bob was his friend and that he would feel betrayed by both of us if he were to discover our secret. Stan concurred, stating that it was merely a moment of passion and that it would forever remain between us. As I stood there, my heart filled with shock and pain, I was still haunted by Laura's confession. Mary's words served to erode any remaining hope I had. They destroyed the last remnants of my illusions and I felt completely lost and empty. How did you end up in bed with Stan and turn your husband into a horny one? Hearing this question, I felt a sense of profound disillusionment and despair. I was filled with a sense of humiliation and a loss of identity. I felt an overwhelming urge to lash out at both Stan and my unfaithful wife. Laura took a moment to recount how Stan had approached her seeking comfort in a moment of despair. The momentary pleasure was overshadowed by the awareness of betrayal. Furthermore, she expressed remorse for the pain she had caused, as she revealed the intimate details she had shared with Stan. She stated, in a somber tone, "Please do not think in that manner. I merely made another misstep. I erred, and I should have exercised greater discernment." Stan had invited her to lunch, but she had declined, stating that they should not see each other alone. He had informed her that he was experiencing depression and required a conversation. Stan informed me that he felt I was the only person who could comprehend his situation. He proposed that he would prepare dinner for us if I were to visit his residence for at least an hour. I subsequently made another significant error by going to his house unaccompanied. We conversed and ate salads, washing them down with wine. After an hour of casual conversation, he expressed his gratitude for our previous encounter. He stood next to me, preparing to take our dishes to the he then proceeded to kiss me once more, this time in a more passionate manner. In summary, we ended up in his bed for the remainder of the day. It was not a romantic encounter, it was merely a physical act. I was aware that it was wrong, but it was unavoidable. To be frank, it was the most satisfying sexual experience I had had in years. He had not engaged in sexual activity for a considerable period of time, and he was a passionate lover. It was an incredible few hours of intense sexual activity. However, we both understood that it would not happen again after I showered. After dressing, I informed him that this would never happen again and that he should not contact me. He responded by stating that he was a wonderful man and that he should find a woman his age with whom he could form a loving relationship. I told him that I would not jeopardize my marriage, and we both agreed that this would be the last time. I was filled with anger at his betrayal and the pain I felt was intense. I clenched my fist tightly in an attempt to contain the storm of emotions raging within me. The revelation about Laura's former encounter with Stan was a significant source of distress, intensifying with each subsequent disclosure. My sense of stability and the life I had known were suddenly disrupted, and I felt a sense of overwhelming loss. I experienced a complex emotional state, characterized by a profound sense of anger and a simultaneous desire to salvage what remained of our relationship. I was determined not to lose her, yet I grappled with the burden of betrayal. My mind was flooded with a multitude of conflicting emotions, including resentment and anger, which were intertwined with feelings of helplessness and vulnerability. I experienced a profound sense of helplessness and vulnerability. I was perplexed by her actions and the betrayal of trust. Just as I was seeking a glimmer of hope, Laura's subsequent remark struck me with a profound impact. Her words inflicted a deep emotional wound, intensifying my anger and disbelief. I acknowledged the wrongfulness of her actions, yet at that moment, they seemed inevitable. My anger reached its zenith. How could she so brazenly treat her? Her actions were regarded as inconsequential, as if they were merely uncontrollable impulses. As I listened to my wife dismiss her infidelities, I experienced a growing sense of anger and betrayal. This went beyond a mere physical act, as she deliberately and knowingly put our marriage at risk. The room seemed to close in around me, and I sought ways to cope with my anger. I felt the urge to scream and break free, but I understood that this would not solve anything. The pain was overwhelming, and I felt trapped. I was aware that this would not solve anything, the pain was all-consuming. At that moment, I realized that I could not immediately figure everything out. When she spoke again, I listened carefully to find some hope for our future together. When she spoke, her voice trembled with emotion. Laura admitted that despite feeling guilty, she could not help but remember the intense passion she shared with Stan. She said that these memories became a secret refuge for her, which she sought when making love to me. She would say, "Never again. All I have now are wonderful memories. I am reluctant to admit it, but I use them when Bob makes love to me. I know it is wrong, but I cannot get them out of my head. These memories are all I have left." It was a heartbreaking confession. There was a sense of sadness in Laura's words as she tried to accept that these memories of Stan would always be a part of despite her desire to erase them. Emily remained silent. However, after Laura's confession, she spoke up. I am envious, she said. I love Scott, too, but I would like to experience sexual intimacy like you did with Stan. I don't want to say anything, but Scott is somewhat diminutive. I am deeply in love with him, but I would like to try something different just once. Mary let out a soft moan, indicating that the story had aroused her. Bob, however, was unaware of this. The question of whether your fantasies about Stan involve him or not is irrelevant. What is important is that you stop this behavior immediately. You need to take control of your emotions and stop hurting Bob. He is not stupid and he will see through your lies. I will make sure that he knows nothing about this. I will never do this again. I am aware that I made a mistake, but I am also aware that it is difficult to live with the guilt. In addition to the wine, what helps me is that I finally disclosed the entire account to another individual. As a result, my future was now at risk, as the women engaged in idle chatter about me. I am the one who purchased the lavish residence, handled the financial obligations, and permitted my wife to enjoy the finer things in life without working. I provided her with a lifestyle that included a spa, country club membership, shopping, a swimming pool, a housekeeper, and other amenities at my own expense. I was taken aback by the gravity of the situation. Laura's confession elicited a state of disbelief and tears streamed down my face, indicating the depth of my pain. Time seemed to fly by in a blur as I listened to the conversation and was unable to tear myself away from the painful truth. I came to understand that I had to distance myself from the situation, at least for a while, with a heavy heart. I took my fishing bait and the bottle of a Montilla sherry I had purchased for the boys and headed back to Roger's residence. The gentlemen are awaiting my return to discuss the internal turmoil I am experiencing. The tears continue to flow as I drive, a whirlwind of confusion and resentment swirling around me. I require time to reflect and process the betrayal I recently discovered. I am not yet prepared to meet with Laura and share what I have learned. The pain is too intense and overwhelming. I am inclined to adhere to my initial plan. I had intended to spend the weekend in solitude, seeking solace in a place where I could be alone with my thoughts. However, circumstances seemed to be conspiring against me when I realized that I would be spending these days with Stan, the individual involved in the heartbreaking affair. The mere prospect of being in his presence only served to exacerbate my suffering. I was uncertain of what to expect, and this uncertainty weighed heavily upon me. I was unsure if I would be able to contain my emotions. I was uncertain as to whether I would be able to meet him in person without succumbing to my emotions and revealing the extent of my distress. As I drove back to Roger's house, I was overwhelmed with tears and a profound sense of loss and pain. The upcoming weekend seemed to loom over me like a dark cloud, and I was unsure of how to cope with the situation. I knew only that I needed time to heal and to find a way to reconcile my broken heart. I felt completely isolated, deceived by an individual I had previously regarded as a source of trust. The desolation within me was overwhelming, and I implored that I might eventually find a means of healing the wounds to my soul. Upon my arrival, Roger was situated outside, loading his Escalade. He discerned that something was amiss and that my eyes were glazed over. I was acutely aware that I was not yet prepared to divulge the cause of my distress, yet when he inquired as to its source, I was compelled to respond. Upon being asked what was wrong, I provided a plausible response. I informed him that I was experiencing a migraine and needed to disengage from the situation for a brief period. I was confident that he would understand. He appeared to be accustomed to dealing with such situations and was supportive. I requested to sit in front of him and close my eyes to relax. I was certain that I would be fine and that missing our annual trip was not an option. I needed to unwind and decompress. He agreed and offered to take care of the preparations while I relaxed. Please go inside and relax while we complete our preparations. We will depart in approximately 30 minutes when we are ready. I will come for you. 30 minutes later, I was seated in the front passenger seat, and my colleague Roger was attending to me. He provided me with his wife's blindfold and a pair of his noise-canceling headphones. As I sat in the passenger seat with Stan and Scott in the back, Roger handed me the blindfold. The headphones plunged me into darkness, limiting my senses to smell, touch, and taste. This allowed me to process the unexpected situation. The guys understood my reticence and offered to help if I needed anything. I was unable to look at Stan and simply kept my eyes closed, thanking them for their understanding. For the next 3 hours, I remained in that dark place, sitting quietly and contemplating the disaster I had just witnessed. I reflected on the recent incident and recalled our years together, recalling how I had held Laura in high regard and considered myself fortunate when she gave me Michael and Katie, our admirable offspring. She had stated that this was an isolated incident and that she would never repeat it. I was motivated to forgive her and move on, but her final remarks about her thoughts of Stan during our intimate moments were a significant obstacle. I am unable to envisage how any man could survive such an ordeal. Unfortunately, I believe this confession has irreparably damaged our marriage. I reflected on the many happy memories we had made together as a family and tears welled up in my eyes. I swiftly wiped them away, the first time I can recall doing so. I experienced a sense of difficulty and confusion. I had no answers and was uncertain about the appropriate course of action. I must have fallen asleep because the last thing I remember is Roger shaking my shoulder and waking me up. He inquired about my well-being and expressed concern. I was unusually quiet for the next 2 days and used my migraine as an excuse. As an excuse, the men left me alone as I was attempting to avoid negatively impacting Scott and Roger's trip. I continued to grapple with my emotions, reflecting on my life experiences, both past and future. It was challenging, but I was confident that I would persevere. However, days later, I found myself on the path leading to the lake, accompanied only by Stan. Roger and Scott were scheduled to meet us at the boat dock. I followed Stan through the forest, following the path he was taking. I heard Laura's words echoing in my head, and suddenly I was overcome with rage on the side of the path. I noticed a large fallen branch, approximately the size of a baseball bat, without thinking. I retrieved the branch, noting its substantial weight, and observed Stan, who was situated approximately 20 steps ahead of me. I then advanced rapidly, lifted the heavy branch, and brought it down on Stan's right shoulder. He attempted to strike the head, but at the last moment, he altered his trajectory and crushed his collarbone. This action caused Stan to experience acute pain as he fell to the ground. I then observed the man who was engaging in sexual activity with my wife. He was holding his shoulder, so I verbally expressed my displeasure by shouting, "This is for you, sleeping with my wife." I then proceeded to kick him in the groin with considerable force. I struck him with a powerful kick and observed him arching in pain. I continued to strike him until he lost consciousness. After a few minutes, I came to my senses and carried Stan to a tree, where I helped him regain consciousness. A few minutes later, he was fully aware of his surroundings. "Listen," I said, "I know everything about you and Laura. Right now, you're fortunate to still be alive." My face turned red with rage. "Be silent. You slept with her, period. Do not speak to me for the remainder of the trip. Do not utter a word about this to Laura. If you do, I will hold you to account. I am unsure of my next steps regarding her, but I do not require your complicity in ruining that. You have already ruined my 20-year marriage. It has been a year since our marriage. I implore you, do not ruin my revenge. Bob, she loves you. It is not possible to divorce her. I take responsibility for what has happened, and I am sorry. Please, just blame it on me and not her. Bob, I was hurt by Susan's decision to leave me while Laura was by my side. It was an unexpected turn of events, and she felt guilty after I pushed her. It is imperative that you refrain from divorcing her, as she harbors profound affection for you." I struck him once more. At that precise moment, Roger and Scott observed that I was once again kicking him, and they hastened to pull me away. "Bob, what are you doing? What has transpired?" Roger assisted me in rising to my feet, and we promptly returned to the cabin. In the subsequent hour, Stan was in a state of distress, citing that I had attacked him from behind and that the altercation was unfair. I then instructed him to be silent and proceeded to play the audio recording for the benefit of the entire group. Upon the conclusion of the recording, Roger addressed his nephew with a vehement outburst, labeling him as a disgraceful individual. He accused him of betraying their friend and the men who had offered him employment when he was financially unstable and in need of guidance. Additionally, he highlighted the impropriety of Stan's actions, including sexual relations with one of their wives and his audacity to accompany them on the trip. Roger further emphasized that Stan's resentment towards Bob was unwarranted and that he should be grateful for their hospitality. "It is inaccurate to claim that I dumped you in the middle of the lake. Furthermore, I do not wish to see or hear from you for the remainder of the trip. I advise you to be grateful for your continued survival." Roger then interjected, and Scott concurred. It is important to note that there is another issue with this recording. You have heard what my wife and Mary have said about it, and how intriguing they find it. Our wives are delighted with Laura's infidelity and are keeping it a secret. I am unsure if you are aware of this, but I have a problem with this. When I return, Emily and I will have a serious conversation about it. I acknowledge your perspective. Scott, your actions were disrespectful to all of us. He turned to Stan, giving him a penetrating gaze, and stated, "You have caused significant damage to one marriage and possibly 2 others. Perhaps we should abandon you in the middle of the lake." Stan simply gazed at the floor and remained silent. He finally recognized the gravity of his actions. I concur that they are all involved, but I request a few days before taking any action. I will provide you with a copy of the recording, but I must meet with Laura before she discovers my knowledge. This individual's actions have caused significant distress and emotional turmoil. It is now evident that every instance of sexual intimacy will be tainted by the knowledge that the other party is contemplating infidelity. This realization has led to the conclusion that a marital relationship cannot be sustained. It is likely that a divorce will be pursued. Roger, in a contemplative state, gazed at his nephew, Stan. You are a malevolent individual. You will not communicate with Laura or the other wives without our express permission. If you alert Laura to the impending consequences, we will make your life a living hell. If you disappear, none of us will be upset. You are my nephew and family, and that is the only reason I have not kicked your ass and left you in the woods. You offended our friend and Goodman just because you could not keep your girlfriend. You seduced another man's wife. You are a malevolent individual, and I am ashamed to admit that you are my sister's child." No word was uttered. They did not speak to him again the entire trip. To his credit, he stayed aloof and avoided conflict. All that remained was to decide what to do with Laura as we drove home. I thought about it at length. I refrained from physically assaulting you and abandoning you in the woods because you had offended our friend and neighbor, a respectable man, by your inability to maintain a relationship with your girlfriend. Instead, you seduced another man's wife. You are a disgrace to our family, and I am ashamed to admit that you are my sister's child. Stan nodded in understanding. No one spoke to him again on the trip. He remained aloof and avoided conflict. All that remained was to decide what to do with Laura as we drove home. I thought about it all and wondered how Laura would react. If the roles were reversed, I would have had a plan. I have a deep-seated affection for Laura, and I could probably tolerate one-time sexual intercourse with Stan. However, the prospect of her fantasizing about such an encounter while engaged in sexual intercourse with me is unbearable. I therefore decided to leave the fate of the relationship in her hands. My plan was to initiate a discussion about the affair, leading her to believe that I was having an affair. I would then observe her reaction and determine her response to forgiveness. If she forgave, I would do the same for her sake, and the relationship would ultimately be salvageable. However, I was uncertain about her reaction. I was uncertain about my feelings for her and the future of our marriage. When I arrived home and entered my driveway, I experienced a range of intense emotions, including anger and anxiety. Despite feeling distressed, I knew it was time to meet with Laura. I needed to maintain composure and act in a way that would facilitate a productive conversation. I attempted to regulate my emotions and act in a normal manner, which proved to be one of the most challenging tasks I have ever attempted. Upon entering the house, I was greeted with a warm welcome. Laura was dressed in a manner that was considered appropriate and presentable. She extended a warm embrace and kiss, which I would miss if she were to choose a different path. Despite my anger, I still loved this unfaithful partner. My rage intensified as I contemplated her infidelity. However, the aroma of her perfume and the exquisite meal she had prepared helped to assuage my distress. We enjoyed a splendid dinner, and I managed to remain gracious and attentive as she recounted her experiences from the previous days. It was still relatively early when she led me to the bedroom, expressing her desire for physical intimacy and affection. She was visibly aroused and eager for sexual intercourse. I reflected on the implications of our future, recognizing that it hinged on her actions. Laura acted swiftly, removing my trousers within a minute of our arrival in bed. After a brief interval, she had lowered herself to the bed and was pulling me towards her. This was the first occasion on which I had been unable to engage in sexual intercourse with her during the entire duration of our relationship. Laura looked up at me with a look of shock on her face. I became aware that this was hurting her. What had happened? It was time for me to speak. I placed the telephone on the nightstand and began to record the conversation. I needed to convey to Laura that there was another individual involved, and that I was experiencing a profound sense of regret at being unable to remain silent on the matter. She gazed up at me, inquiring about the nature of my revelation. I expressed my sincere apologies, noting that the incident had only occurred on a few occasions. On 2 occasions, the sexual encounter was so exceptional that I found it difficult to dislodge from my thoughts. As I had anticipated, her Latin temperament manifested itself. You are a detestable individual. Have you engaged in sexual intercourse with another person and are unable to move on from it? I still love you, but I cannot ignore the fact that it was just sex. I am shocked and disbelieving that you would engage in an affair. I am curious as to what you mean by, I can't stop thinking about it. To be frank, the sexual encounter was the most memorable and enjoyable experience in my life, and I find it difficult to shake off. I spoke carefully, not implying any implication of my own, but simply repeating her own words from the recording. She began to cry. I was undoubtedly impolite and discourteous in my response to her accusation of infidelity. However, I maintain that I am not the perpetrator of this act, but rather, the victim. I excused myself from the situation, and she proceeded to express her displeasure in a rather forceful manner. I was left in a state of emotional distress as a result of her actions. I will not tolerate this treatment. I intend to initiate divorce proceedings and pursue financial compensation. Despite my role as a devoted wife, mother, and homemaker, I was subjected to this behavior. I found her actions to be somewhat amusing. Furthermore, she will undoubtedly express her displeasure in the near future. Laura, the sexual encounters in question were limited to 2 instances. Are you certain that you wish to pursue a divorce on the basis of these encounters? It is implausible that these encounters were the sole basis for your decision to seek a divorce. Additionally, there is no guarantee that there were no other instances of infidelity. Given these circumstances, I am unable to trust your assertion. I did indeed desire a divorce, and I will exact a substantial penalty for your infidelity. You are aware that our state has recently enacted legislation in favor of the aggrieved party in cases of adultery, and I intend to proceed with a divorce based on this law and claim the full value of our marital assets. I will even pursue the dissolution of your business interests and retain you as one of the pool's most prominent members. I must admit that I am surprised at your callous and cruel response. As I have already stated, there was no love involved, there was only sex, and only on 2 occasions. Is this truly what you want? Are you sure that forgiveness is impossible? Perhaps we could consider counseling. I attempted to save the marriage, but it seems that she herself made the decision to end it. The decision to terminate the relationship was made without his awareness. The dissolution of the marriage was inevitable. He would not remain married to an unfaithful spouse. She was to pack her belongings and leave. She could either stay with Roger or seek accommodation elsewhere. He did not wish to see her again. He would convey the details of this decision to his lawyer. She was not expecting this turn of events. She had just executed the decision with a venomous tone of voice, exclaiming, "Why do you have such a grin on your face?" "Well, honey, you just made my decision easier." As I stood adjacent to her and initiated playback on my mobile device, my unfaithful spouse became increasingly perplexed upon hearing herself speak. However, she persisted in listening, and then her demeanor transformed to one of astonishment when she heard the entirety of the discourse. She then became visibly distraught and collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed by the sudden realization of the truth. The incident had a profound impact on her. I express my deepest regret for what has transpired. She inquired about the circumstances surrounding my absence. I was compelled to return for an item I had forgotten. I was reluctant to disrupt your gathering, so I entered through the rear entrance to avoid any disturbance. It was then that I was privy to your discourse concerning me in the bedroom. I recorded this information because I intended to share it with you and engage in some light-hearted teasing when I returned. However, when you confessed to your extramarital affair with Stan, I remained and documented everything. Darling, you heard me say that it was merely a one-time, isolated incident. You should be aware that there is more to the story. There was no sexual relationship between us. I have to forgive myself. I am very sorry, but you were not supposed to find out in the midst of our emotional distress. Laura's words of repentance were conveyed through the pain. Her voice trembled with genuine sadness and regret as she asked for forgiveness, exposing her vulnerability. I was moved by her sincerity and realized that despite the pain and anger, there was a profound underlying love. However, he remained unmoved by her tears and pleas. My voice was detached and unyielding as I conveyed the painful truth to Laura. The resentment was profound, and I was unable to shake the feeling of betrayal. The words that she dreamed about Stan during our intimate moments irreparably damaged the last vestiges of trust between us. "I heard everything, Laura," I responded, losing the warmth in my voice. "You are correct, but you have omitted the crucial detail of admitting that you dream about him when you and I were engaged in sexual intercourse. It is unreasonable to expect me to simply disregard this information, particularly given that it is the first time this has occurred during our marriage." While her tears did not elicit a strong emotional response, the pain associated with her words was profound. The image of her dreaming of another man while I invested my emotional and physical energy into our intimate moments was too much for me to bear. I am unable to ignore this information. I cannot ignore this, Laura. My voice was filled with bitterness as I continued. I also cannot ignore the fact that you were never going to tell me about it and continued to keep me in the dark. You destroyed something inside me, and I am unsure if I can ever trust you again. I am uncertain if I can believe that you truly love me if you are fantasizing about another individual. I was overcome with indignation and felt that I deserved better. The notion of being with someone who could not fully commit to me was the final straw. I cannot simply pretend that everything is fine. Dreaming about another man while we are together is a reason for the dissolution of our relationship was precipitated by my realization that, during the most intimate moments, you were preoccupied with thoughts of him rather than of me. The pain I experienced was overwhelming, and the prospect of repairing our relationship seemed implausible. I was unable to forgive you for betraying me in such a profound manner. A profound silence descended upon the room, as the gravity of my words lingered in the air. There was nothing more to be said, the truth had been revealed, and the pain was too profound to be erased. It became evident that the damage done was irreparable, and the path to forgiveness was a path I was unable to envision at that moment. I came to understand that our relationship had reached a point of irremediable destruction and that the future we had envisioned together had become nothing more than a distant, unattainable dream. This realization was painful, but it was one I was forced to accept if I was to embark on the journey of healing and moving on, even if it meant doing so without her by my side. I wish to clarify that I am not being understood. I love you and do not want him. Bob, I request that you allow me the opportunity to elucidate the circumstances. I ask that you refrain from any falsehoods. I have listened to the recording of your conversation with him, and the mere thought of him in our bed is too much for me to bear. I had not anticipated that you would betray my love and cause me such distress. If I am mistaken, kindly direct your gaze towards me and affirm that your thoughts were not preoccupied with him during our intimate encounter. I am entitled to expect such a response. It is unacceptable that you are unable to maintain eye contact. You have effectively destroyed our relationship. After my divorce, you will be free to pursue a relationship with him. This will eliminate the necessity for you to fantasize about him. She continued to sob openly, her words barely audible. You cannot divorce me. I love you. Please give me a chance to make things right. This is amusing now, is it not? Do you desire my forgiveness? Imagine my shock. I will rectify the situation. I love you. I am sorry. What makes you believe that I will remain with you after your actions? Do I really? His demeanor suggested that he was prepared to accept the betrayal of his wife. As I spoke to Laura, I experienced a range of emotions, including a tremor in my voice. Over the past 3 days, I have experienced a profound emotional distress. I have been torn between two competing impulses. On the one hand, I have been driven to seek a path towards forgiveness and reconciliation, and on the other, I have been struggling to move on from this infidelity. A temporal discrepancy exists, but everything changed when I heard what you told your friends. The pain in my heart was palpable, and I was unable to conceal it in my voice. The fact that she proudly shared intimate details of her thoughts during our sexual intercourse destroyed the last vestiges of trust one had had in her throughout the course of our marriage. I had never cried openly. However, I was no longer able to conceal my distress. I felt humiliated, Laura. I continued, tears flowing and my voice trembling. These women, your friends, now perceive me as an uninformed spouse. I was living a pretense, unaware of the developments behind my back. I was aware that they were derisively laughing at me and labeling me as uninformed. This experience has severely compromised my sense of self-worth. I still retain some worth, and thus it is no longer a part of my life. In addition to our marriage, you have managed to destroy our friendships. She was visibly moved when she saw my tears and realized that she had caused me incredible pain. I had previously believed that deep down she did not want to hurt me at all. However, my tears made her realize what her selfish act led to. She felt overwhelming regret and sadness and cried openly, attempting to hug me. I pushed her away and took a deep breath, attempting to pull myself together. I know. In the past, I was capable of behaving in an ignorant manner as a husband. However, my perspective has shifted significantly. I am unable to disregard the knowledge I have acquired. I will not tolerate being treated in such a manner again. When I spoke, I could discern pain from betrayal in my voice. I was eager to salvage our marriage and rekindle the love we once shared. However, the reality of the situation became increasingly apparent, and I could not identify a clear path forward. During our return from fishing, I reflected on how to preserve our marriage. I acknowledged this to her. My voice trembled, yet I was unable to identify a viable solution. Consequently, I opted to allow you to make the decision independently. I am uncertain whether I can ever trust you again. I am reluctant to endure a life characterized by doubt and anguish. After I concluded my remarks, there was a prolonged interval of silence, during which the atmosphere was thick with the weight of our emotions. Our future was shrouded in uncertainty, and I was uncertain about what lay ahead. However, one thing was clear: I could not continue living in a marriage marred by betrayal and doubt. What do you mean you'll let me decide? Given that I was unable to, I then proceeded to devise a plan of action. I will recount the details of the affair and subsequently take the necessary steps in accordance with your reaction. The key advantage of my plan was that the fate of our marriage was contingent solely on your response. In the narrative I presented 20 minutes ago, I did not explicitly state that I was engaged in an affair. Instead, I merely indicated that I was involved in a romantic relationship. I reiterated your assertion that she was physically intimate with him. You are aware of the phenomenon of fantasizing about a romantic partner while in a committed relationship. 20 minutes ago, I informed you that the affair was a temporal discrepancy exists. The affair was not rooted in love, but rather in sexual desire. I inquired about the possibility of navigating this challenging situation. He even proposed seeking professional counsel. Do you recall your response? She instructed me to vacate the marital residence. She asserted that you would inflict irreparable harm during the divorce proceedings. She claimed that you would seize control of our business interests and transform me into a domestic worker. You demonstrated no leniency or compassion. Consequently, I will not evict you from the marital home as you did me. However, you will be required to relocate to the guest room. I do not wish to share my personal space with you. I will consult with a lawyer and file for adultery. I am eager to take advantage of the new divorce law you have been discussing with me, despite your objections. I did not intend to imply anything of the sort. I ask you to believe me. Do not take that action. What about our 20 years together and our children? My voice was filled with emotion as I spoke against Laura. I was overwhelmed with sadness and frustration. The pain of betrayal was overwhelming, and I felt the weight of her actions falling on our entire family. I understand it will be challenging. I paused for a moment. I was overcome with a sense of resentment and anger, yet I was unable to ignore the gravity of your actions, Laura. You did not consider the implications of your actions on our children or our years together when you chose to betray me and our family. The pain I felt was immense, and it was as if a part of me had been torn apart. The trust that once bound us was irreparably damaged, and I was uncertain about how to move forward. What you did was unforgivable. I spoke with a firm voice, and you will have to face the consequences, just as you were prepared to punish me for my mistakes. I requested that she remove herself from my bedroom. My voice was filled with sadness as I led her away, physically separating her from the space we once shared. The room, which had once served as a sanctuary for our love, was now tainted by betrayal. I was unable to sleep that night, mourning the death of my marriage. I had loved her with all my heart, and I was aware that, during the most intimate moments of our lives, she had been dreaming of another man. This knowledge continued to weigh on me like a dark cloud. I was aware that some men are able to forgive their wives for such transgressions, but I was unable to do so. I was unable to muster the strength to do so, as the pain was too great and the trust that had been broken seemed irreparable despite my love for her. I was unable to move on from her words, which had shattered the dream of a future together and caused immeasurable loss. I was compelled to respect my feelings and emotions, even if it meant letting go of the woman I once loved so much. Before I left, I looked at the woman I had loved for the past 2 decades and said, "You have broken my heart today. I lost someone who didn't care about me, but today you lost." The individual in question was prepared to do anything for the other person. The sounds of begging for forgiveness continued to reverberate in my mind until I departed from Laura's residence for the final time. Bob made a distressing telephone call to his children, dreading the moment when he would have to share this unfortunate news. His son, Michael, expressed understanding and unwavering support, providing a glimmer of comfort amidst the chaos. However, Katie's reaction dashed his hopes. The anger she displayed reflected her close bond with her mother and caused him immense distress. Bob attempted to comprehend her perspective, but the significant differences between them seemed insurmountable. The rift between them seemed insurmountable. In a rare display of strength, Laura took the trouble to talk to Katie. She admitted her grave mistake and urged her not to hold a grudge against her father, who had done nothing wrong. The children's lives were forever changed. However, Bob was determined to secure their future. He promised to fund their college education and care for them. The confrontation between the men and their wives was filled with betrayal and heartache. Mary's heart broke when she learned of Laura's divorce. She felt that the long-term friendship between Roger and his wife was irreparably damaged. Roger was enraged by his wife's decision to keep their affair a secret and, even more so, by her apparent encouragement of it. The revelation on the tape was a devastating blow for him, forcing him to doubt everything he had previously believed. The depth of his resentment was such that he was unable to ignore it, and it seemed as if the bond they had once shared was irreparably broken. The days that followed were filled with intense emotions and heartache as the consequences of their actions began to unravel before their eyes. The once close-knit group of friends was now faced with the harsh reality of betrayal and broken trust. The formerly close-knit group of friends now faces the harsh reality of betrayal and broken trust. Mary, devastated by the news of Laura's divorce, confronted Roger, her husband, and learned of her role in keeping the affair a secret. She experienced a profound sense of guilt and shame. Roger was enraged and demanded to know why she protected Laura. She was rendered speechless and repentant by the awareness of her involvement. A similar scene unfolded at Scott's house when Emily heard hurtful words spoken about her husband on tape. The humiliation and shame were too much for Scott, who made the painful decision to leave, leaving Emily in tears and remorse. Meanwhile, there was tension in Bob and Laura's house as Bob served Laura with divorce papers. She implored him to pardon her, cognizant of the gravity of her misdeed and the anguish she had caused, yet her entreaties were unheeded. Bob's heart was too lacerated to contemplate reconciliation, the wound was profound, and he was acutely aware that he could never trust her again. Our case was heard by Judge Monter, and the divorce proceedings became a distressing ordeal as Laura desperately endeavored to salvage her marriage during the trial. Stan provided testimony that was replete with regret for the damage he had caused. He was informed that he had to either testify truthfully or face the consequences of his actions, which would include the wrath of his husband and a profound sense of guilt. His testimony was akin to an admission of guilt and an apology to the injured parties. The courtroom was filled with tears as the final blow to the marriage was delivered. Laura's heart sank even further as she re-experienced the affair while listening to the recording. The judge's decision was prompt and decisive. Bob received a significant portion of their assets and denied spousal support under new rules set by the state. Laura came to recognize that her actions had led to the destruction of her marriage. The excitement and passion she had felt with Stan now seemed like a distant memory, overshadowed by regret and pain. She had caused Bob to lose the promising future they had once envisioned together, leaving Laura with the burden and ramifications of her infidelity. Confronted with the stark reality of her circumstances, she recognized that she had not only lost her marriage but also the sense of security and the life she had once cherished. The consequences of their actions altered the course of these friends' lives, leaving a trail of the ramifications of their actions will continue to influence their future, as they grapple with the pain of their past mistakes and strive to move forward. Despite the pain of the separation, Bob extended an invitation to Laura to reside in their guest room until she secured her own accommodation and resolved her future plans. The house is spacious enough for them to live in it without significant stress. Bob maintained his employment. It became increasingly challenging for him to maintain his mental stability. He returned home at a late hour to avoid encountering her. To her credit, Laura persisted in attempting to rekindle their relationship. However, Bob was uninterested in seeing her again. He began dating Becky, his secretary, who was amenable to making Bob happy. She recognized that Bob was a suitable match for her. Despite the 10-year age difference between them, she was content with the relationship. Bob is a commendable individual. Becky was incredulous about Laura's lack of judgment and good fortune. She would never give Bob a reason to worry or doubt his love. The emotional turbulence of the previous 2 months weighed heavily on Laura's shoulders. Having Becky move in with Bob and take over the space that was once hers was a constant reminder of the life lost. It broke her heart to see the happiness and affection shared between her former husband and his new partner. The husband and the woman who had assumed her role were observed by Laura with great scrutiny. Every look, every touch, and every moment of interaction between Bob and Becky was a source of profound distress for Laura. She experienced intense feelings of jealousy and profound regret for her actions that led to this situation. The once happy home, which was filled with love between Bob and another woman, became a constant source of pain and sadness. The bed in which they once slept side by side became a place of intimacy for Bob and Becky. The thought that they were the realization that she had abandoned her husband out of selfishness and would now have to face the consequences of her actions caused Laura immense distress. She felt isolated and fearful, and was compelled to find a way out of this emotional predicament. The future appeared uncertain and daunting, and she was plagued by the fear of being left alone without the men she had once loved so much. The prospect of an unknown future only served to exacerbate her suffering, leaving her with no other choice but to confront her situation. Laura was compelled to confront the reality of her circumstances, recognizing that she had lost the men she once held in high regard. Having reached a point of acceptance, she came to understand that she needed to address her past missteps and begin the process of rebuilding her life. It was a challenging journey, but she was determined to find the strength and inner resilience to move forward, despite the obstacles that lay ahead. Laura aspired to achieve a state of peace and happiness once more, even if it meant leaving It was at Bob's office that Laura first learned of Stan's role in Bob's divorce. Upon this discovery, the other employees treated Stan with disdain, avoiding him and treating him as if he were a leper. He was made to feel like an outcast, and he realized that he could not stay there. His work was being ruined, and he was being made to lose money. Stan decided to open his own business and took several clients with him. Bob's lawyer explained that Stan was under a non-disclosure agreement. Stan was unaware of the terms of the non-compete agreement and was in breach of their contract. Lacking in education, he was unable to grasp the implications of this situation and continued to develop his business. His lawyer advised him to be patient and wait a few months until they could present an appropriate case. However, within 10 months, Stan had amassed over 100 clients and his business was flourishing at an impressive rate, and he was basking in the success he had worked so hard to achieve. However, this elation was short-lived when a lawyer filed a lawsuit against Stan, demanding $1 million from him. The lawsuit accused him of not only causing significant financial losses but also of violating an ironclad non-compete agreement. While the legal proceedings continued, Bob was still recuperating from the injuries inflicted by Stan. Revenge was not his primary concern. He sought to hold Stan accountable for stealing his wife, destroying his marriage, and poaching his customers. When the dust settled, the outcome for Stan was unfavorable. Bob prevailed, taking over Stan's thriving business and leaving him with no choice but to file for personal bankruptcy. Stan had built a promising career and had the opportunity to become a stakeholder in Bob's company. The collapse of the $1 million enterprise before his eyes resulted in Stan's destitution and emotional distress, as well as his lack of formal education. Consequently, he was compelled to engage in arduous day labor to sustain himself. The ramifications of his actions inevitably impacted him, and he was forced to confront a painful lesson that would haunt him forever: the importance of refraining from interfering in the affairs of another man's wife and the gravity of betraying trust so callously. Scott and Roger's wives came to recognize the proximity they had come to jeopardizing their marriages, just as Laura had done. This served as a stark wake-up call for them. They initiated communication with their former partners, recognizing the significance of forgiveness and the necessity of respect and appreciation within the relationship. They proceeded to prioritize the restoration of trust and communication, aiming to prevent similar occurrences in the future. Over time, they were able to reinforce their marital bond and move forward together, rekindling the love and forgiveness that had initially characterized their relationship. They ceased all communication with Laura and Bob, and experienced a sense of loss for the positive memories they had shared. In contrast, Laura's circumstances took a turn for the worse as she, dealing with the consequences of her failed marriage, she accepted that Bob would never take her back. Working as a receptionist at a dental office brought her some stability, but it did not compensate for the loss of her previously happy marriage. Living in a small apartment, she experienced the daily burden of loneliness and regret as she attempted to move on with her life. She began a relationship with an older man from the office, but the new relationship could not compare to the love she had lost with Bob. She found herself lacking the happiness she had once felt. The memory of her former happiness was now but a distant recollection, and the pain of her past mistakes followed her everywhere, even in moments of solitude. She found herself wishing that she had made a different choice and preserved the life she had with Bob. However, she had to come to terms with the fact that she had thrown away something special and irreplaceable. The future that had once seemed so bright was now but a shadow of its former self, and she felt a deep sense of sadness and longing for what had been lost. Bob missed Laura dearly. However, this void was subsequently filled by Becky, who made it her mission to emulate the ideal soulmate. Bob was drawn to the young woman's vitality and desire, and the couple wed a year later. 1 year later, Michael and Katie's half-brother subscribed to our channel to ensure fidelity in relationships. We encourage you to proceed with the next story, as it is of a markedly different nature. If you are under the age of 18, we advise against listening to the next story.